In spring 1942, there were 250 Americans of Japanese ancestry enrolled at 6 California State University campuses. On February 19, 1942, Executive Order 9066 and the military orders that followed forever changed the course of their lives. These young adults, the Nisei, born and raised in California, full of promise and hope, were forced to leave their communities and drop out of college. Some moved to an inland state, but most were rounded up and sent to live in an American-style concentration camp in the most desolate parts of the country. Manzanar, Tule Lake, Topaz, Heart Mountain, Rower, Gila River, Poston, Amachi, Jerome, Minidoka became their new home for the duration of World War II. After their release, many Nisei never had the chance to return to college. Their dreams of a college education shattered. In the spring of 2010, the CSU located 125 of these former students and presented them with special honorary bachelor's degrees at commencement ceremonies at 6 campuses. These degrees, although long overdue, brought tears, smiles, and a sense of closure for the former CSU students and the community. The barbed wire fences that imprisoned them and tore them away from their aspirations have now been replaced by the dignity of their very special honorary bachelor's degrees.
In the spring of 1942, some 43 San Diego State students had to leave school because of Federal Executive Order 9066. With the stroke of a pen, families were devastated. Their life's work forcibly abandoned, property left behind, college careers disrupted, loyalty doubted, constitutional rights ignored. We are honored to have 2 students and many family members with us today, so we can acknowledge that injustice and honor their sacrifices.
I can think of no better way to begin the commencement season than to be here today honoring former San Diego State University students who overcame injustice, intolerance, and ignorance and succeeded in spite of everything that happened to them through no fault of their own. This is a momentous day for the California State University. It is a momentous day because San Diego State is the first of 6 CSU campuses to hold commencement ceremonies that award honorary Bachelor of Humane Letters degrees to our former Japanese American students and their families. They represent a present righting of a past wrong.
My father's born in California, my grandfather's born in Hawaii, and on my mother's side they're from the Sacramento Elk Grove area. And they met in camp during World War II. It was one of those good news, bad news. The bad news was that they were in camp. The good news was that had they not met, I wouldn't be here. So those are the kinds of ways of history. And one of the touchstones in our community is the camps that Japanese were incarcerated in during World War II. It's always a reference point. Eventually, during the conversation with new friends or strangers, even if they're Japanese American, somewhere along the way the question comes up, were you in camp? If you were in camp, what camp? If you weren't in camp, what camp was your family in? And that becomes just a touchstone for our community. And in the beginning, very few in our community talked about it after the war. It was as described by a second-generation Nisei activist named Edison Nuno. He described it as like being a rape victim, where you don't want to talk about it, but it has a tremendous impact on your life.
Now we will hear from Karo Yoshimine, Jun Kushino, and the daughter of Viola Takeda, degree recipients from San Diego State University.
My name is Barbara Mukai. My mother was Viola Takeda Kitahara, and she went to San Diego State University. She was born in San Diego, California, and she was raised there until the war broke out.
I graduated Point Loma High School in 1941, and I believe in September of that year was my first year at school. So I was still kind of floundering as far as what my real goals was. I said, well, I'll go to San Diego State University and I'll, start to get my education, and then I'll find my way while I'm there.
My grandfather was a dentist, so actually that's why she went to San Diego State University, because her intent was to become a dental hygienist to help her father.
Conferral of these honorary degrees is a wonderful idea. It is well deserved and symbolically very important. As someone who experienced internment myself, this ceremony has a lot of personal meaning for me as well as you, the honorees. However, I was only 6 years old at the time and went through 1st through 3rd grades in the Minidoka, Idaho internment camp. If I had been old enough to be in college like all of you honorees, I can only imagine how you must have felt to be forced to terminate your higher education under these traumatic and demoralizing circumstances. Your average age at the time of internment was about 19, and almost all of you were American-born citizens. I'm sure your education in American schools imbued you with a deep belief in such American ideals as democracy, freedom, and liberty, making you among the most loyal and patriotic citizens of this nation.
1940 to 41. She was only there a year and a half.
But then the war broke out, and that just took the rug out of my foundation of what I thought.
The interesting thing for me was the experience of those that were going to the college, the university, the state colleges that existed, and community colleges at the time. Their sense of their future was the proverbial rug was pulled out from underneath them. So it was about finishing up, tying together loose ends, putting closure to, and that was the motivation for doing AB 37.
The U.S. government decided you could not be trusted and rounded you up along with about 120,000 other Japanese Americans, 2/3 of whom were American-born citizens, and incarcerated you without trials or even hearings, sometimes with only 48 hours notice. You could only take what you could carry, and were held initially in temporary holding facilities, the so-called assembly centers, such as the Santa Anita Racetrack in Los Angeles County and the Conferring Racetrack in Northern California.
They were sent to Poston.
It was such an intense time that we were ordered to just take what we could carry.
Honestly, they didn't talk about camp. And prior to camp, they really didn't talk. Basically from camp and before, they didn't talk about it. They made a concerted effort not to. But you always hear them talking about, which camp were you in, and she would tell people which camp she was in, but that's really the extent of all I ever heard. She said she had a lot of fun there, because she was always with her friends. They always got together and played. It was just one big play date to her, I think.
There were 3 camps in which we were located in. There was Poston 1 that had about 10,000 people, Poston 2 had 5,000 people, and Poston 3 that had 5,000 people.
In speaking to many Nisei about their internment experiences, I came to realize what a profound psychological impact internment had on them, and why so many of them have been very reticent to talk about it, even to their kids.
They made a really concerted effort after the war to not speak Japanese anymore, to I guess, Americanize themselves more. Our pronunciation of Japanese words was just horrible. And a lot of my friends, they were going to Japanese school to learn, more Japanese, and my parents didn't want us to.
It is certainly understandable that many Nisei would not want to share such pain with their children, to want to protect them, to shield them from such painful experiences, so they could grow up seeing the promise and hope of America rather than its injustices and cruelties. But it should also be noted that even during the darkest days of our incarceration, there were glimmers of hope.
The most I know is that they were from an old boyfriend my mom's, Viola. She received, I think, six of those birds from him. And they really meant a lot to her because she kept them in pristine condition. Always kept them, actually she had them framed in a box frame.
Many non-Japanese friends and neighbors supported the internees through numerous small acts of kindness, such as sending them food and basic supplies, looking after their property, writing them encouraging letters, and carrying out various tasks they didn't have time to attend to before their incarceration.
At a point, I believe they were able to leave and go work places other than the West Coast. So she ended up in Chicago. What I've heard, not from her, but from my aunts, is that she was working secretarial work. Well, I mean, I think she would have continued with her dental hygiene, striving for that degree. She probably would have worked for her father. Interesting enough, what I recently found out is that my grandfather died on the way back from camp. He had an aneurysm. So it left my grandmother with 2 daughters, essentially, to take care of on her own. You know, and she was from Japan, and she didn't really have a profession here at all, other than being a wife and a mother.
And another aspect of it that I found really interesting, and I want to do more research on it, is the number of women that went to college. I mean, we're talking about the 1940s, and there was an extraordinary number of women, Japanese American women, that were going to college.
The awarding of these honorary degrees will hopefully help make up to a small degree for the involuntary disruption of their education and bring closure to this most unfortunate chapter in their lives. But I also believe the awarding of these honorary degrees is important for the symbolic significance of the message it sends to all Americans. It tells us that part of America's greatness is because it can own up to and make amends for its mistakes. Perhaps more importantly, it also tells us that we cannot take our democracy for granted, but that all Americans have a responsibility and stake in preserving our freedoms and liberties for all groups in our society, regardless of race, religion, or nationality.
Carl Yoshimine. When you were forced to leave San Diego State in 1942, you had just discovered your love of history. We are grateful that in spite of this injustice, you persevered and eventually obtained a bachelor's degree in history from Ashbury College, a master's degree in religious education from Ashbury Theological Seminary, and another degree from a divinity school in Berkeley. No doubt your life experience, together with the spirituality that has guided you, has inspired many others to be true to themselves and never lose faith despite the hardships they may encounter. It is a lesson this year's class of graduates would be wise to learn as they enter this next phase of their lives. Reverend Yoshimine, would you please join me to accept your diploma?
I think one thing that I learned in my experience through camp is we can't afford to stay in one place in our lives. If you're hurt, to heal and to move on. It's not worth holding the torch and always being angry, because they'll just ruin your own life and the people around you. And I think that's what education does. It's not just learning things, but it's actually putting it into actual situations where you can move ahead. And I think that's one thing that the receiving the degree reveals, that the school acknowledges where we have been and wants to help us move on. I know, the song, fight on, the Aztec man, Santa Montezuma, we will win again. So I remember that song to my dying day.
Daughter Barbara Mukai, grandson Kyle Mukai, and sister Sophia Takeda are here to accept an honorary degree posthumously on behalf of Viola Midori Takeda. Viola Midori Takeda's time at San Diego State was cut short when she was assigned to the Poston Relocation Center in Arizona. She left the camp for Chicago, where she met her beloved husband, George Kitahara. They returned to California after the war and began their new life together. Her family tells us that Viola was a devoted wife and a caring mother of 4. She passed away just last month, on April 10th. We're saddened that we were not able to offer this symbol of our gratitude to her in person.
I think she would have been really excited and then very proud. I'm sure it would have meant a lot to her. She went to San Diego State for a reason, and I'm sure she would have liked to have possibly a dream to finish her dream there. I don't think being in a relocation camp was a dream for her, really. She had passed away a month before. It really was a bittersweet and emotional moment for me. Actually, much more so than her funeral.
Ms. Junko Kushina. Because of World War II incarceration of Japanese Americans, you were never able to complete your college education. After the war, your family returned to San Diego, but you worked to help with your family's finances. Thanks to the hard work of you and your siblings, the next generation of your family was able to pursue their educational goals. As an example, your nephew, Paul Igashiki, thank you, is an attorney who was recently appointed chair and chief judge of the Administrative Review Board of the U.S. Department of Labor. Ms. Kushino will also accept degrees for her cousins, Helen Hiroko Kushino, and posthumously for Kenji Kushino. Ms. Kushino, would you please come and accept these diplomas? By the authority vested in me by the Chancellor and the Board of Trustees of the California State University, we hereby confer the honorary degree of Bachelor of Humane Letters upon each of you, with all the rights and privileges and responsibilities pertaining thereto. Congratulations.
I believe we must remind ourselves of the immortal words of Pastor Martin Niemöller, who, in recounting his experiences in Nazi Germany, wrote, and I quote, "In Germany they came for the communists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics. I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time there was no one left to speak up for me."
For me, going to college is not just a possibility. It is an expectation. I know, however, that 70 years ago, the opportunity to go to college was taken away from the Nisei. They had done nothing wrong except for being born Japanese in America. Because of the Nisei's courage, loyalty, and hard work, Japanese Americans are recognized today as loyal Americans. Because of their sacrifices, I will be able to go to college. We must commit ourselves to never again letting liberty and justice be taken away from any American just because the color of their skin is different. Okage-sama de. Because of you, I am. Thank you for what you have done for Japanese Americans, for all Americans, and for me. You are like a handprint on my heart. I will not forget what the Nisei have done. Congratulations on receiving your diploma.
I think that's the point. It's not just a history lesson. It's not nostalgia. It's not going back. What it is really going forward. It's a teaching moment to talk about the importance of the Constitution, the importance of people's rights. And no matter the environment, no matter the ethnicity, no matter the gender preference, whatever, people have these rights at all times as Americans. And you can't take them lightly. You can't, just because the situation may be very negative around a war experience or terrorism or whatever the case may be, you can't use that as a reason to trample people's constitutional rights. And as an individual, you have a right of due process, and as an American, you have the protections of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And those things were violated in this chapter of history. And oftentimes we go up to the edge. Sometimes individuals step over and they violate these rights, and we have to pull people back. And I think it also showed the resiliency of the government and their ability to finally redress and apologize for the experience and make corrections in our democracy.
In concluding, let me just say to our Nisei honorees that in accepting these honorary degrees, you are speaking up, not only for Japanese Americans, but for all Americans. Your experiences should be both a warning and an inspiration to all Americans. It warns us that the U.S. Constitution alone will not protect our liberties and freedoms, that it's just a piece of paper which is given life only by the efforts and vigilance of all of us to maintain our democratic principles and ideals for all of our citizens. And it inspires us because after the internment, you did not allow yourself to be consumed in bitterness, but through hard work and determination, you rebuilt your lives and helped ensure a brighter future for upcoming generations of Japanese Americans. So, on behalf of all Japanese Americans, and dare I say for all Americans, I want to express our gratitude to the honorees and the entire Nisei generation for their fortitude, resilience, and sacrifice that has left us with such an enduring and important legacy.
You've heard the never-before-told stories that are part of the history of the California State University and the country. We all must make sure that actions like this never happen to any group of people anywhere again.